Hello everyone, I'm Sarah and I job share with Clare McCluskey at St Joseph's Hospital, and today we're going to be talking to you about saliva assessment and management. And the reason why we're speaking about this is because it was requested at the last SIG event. So I thought I'd start at the very basics. We have three main salivary glands, as you can see. There's the parotid, which is next to your cheek, the submandibular under the jaw, and the sublingual under the tongue. And each of these have ducts connected to them that branch out to respective areas of the mouth. The salivary glands contain two types of cells: serous cells that produce the watery type substance, and mucous cells that produce the thicker type of substance. We also have lots of tiny salivary glands around the mouth that are always switched on, but those three major glands switch on and off in response to different stimuli such as food. And all of that is controlled by the autonomic nervous system. And this is the system that self-regulates without our conscious control. And that consists of the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the system that activates to increase the volume of watery saliva produced, and then also the sympathetic nervous system, which is in contrast responsible for producing a reduced saliva volume and the thicker substance. So dry mouth then occurs when there's a more heavy activation on that sympathetic nervous system. So now getting into the role of saliva. We need to understand the role of saliva first before we can know what to do when it's disordered. The first role of saliva is preventing infection. Saliva is one of the first levels of protection for the body. It has a role in clearing pathogens and microorganisms by trapping them in the saliva and phlegm, which we then swallow down or cough and expectorate. Saliva also has antibacterial, antiviral and antifungal properties, which helps to maintain that normal mouth flora, and all of that contributes to the healing of wounds in the mouth. Saliva also has a role in dental hygiene. It helps break down plaque, and it acts as a buffer to neutralize acids from food or stomach contents like vomit or reflux, and to protect our oral mucosa and our teeth. It also has a role in moistening and lubrication to prevent xerostomia and to protect the mucosa and maintain tissue integrity. By keeping it moist, it means it's less susceptible to abrasions. It also contributes to wound healing and bolus formation by helping the bolus be transferred through the upper digestive tract. It helps it stick together and all move through very neatly. And the lubrication of all these oral structures helps in speaking as well. Saliva has a role in taste by dissolving food particles and distributing these around the mouth to the taste receptors. And also has a part in early digestion. It actually contains an enzyme called amylase that starts to break down starches when it's already in your mouth. So the body can be very, very efficient when it's all working properly. And a massive role of saliva is quality of life. So you can see if any one of those areas weren't being addressed properly by saliva, it would have impacts on a whole range of areas. This is just a nice little diagram I found that provides a visual of all the roles of saliva. And if you want more information about that topic, it's really huge, so we've got heaps of references at the end. So now moving on to why is it that people with MND have saliva problems? The main reason for the relationship between MND and saliva issues is dysphagia. So people with MND have decreased swallowing frequency and a decreased swallow effectiveness that can result in saliva pooling in the mouth and drooling or being aspirated. A second big factor in the weakness is muscle weakness. including deterioration of muscle control, especially the lips, tongue, and neck. And people with MND can also have sensory changes as well as a motor impairment. Some extra factors impacting on this relationship is dehydration, so due to dysphagia, loss of appetite, or reduced access to food or fluids with reduced limb function and a potential memory impairment with frontotemporal dementia. All of that can result in dehydration and thick secretions. Another impact is respiratory function and need for oxygen, which can cause dry mouth and thick saliva. And oral hygiene can also cause the same, and then it can be a vicious cycle. Medications to manage drooling can cause, again, dry mouth and thick secretions. And people with MND also have a disruption to the autonomic nervous system that can alter the type of saliva that's actually produced. So you can see why it's extremely important for saliva to be properly assessed in this population. And before I get into the specific assessments that we use, I will say that we don't assess saliva in isolation. Saliva assessment and management includes close multidis teamwork, and exactly who it includes will depend on your place of work. But ideally, it's the speech path firstly identifying issues and classifying the type and severity of the saliva, which is then supported by information gathering and management options with your medical professionals, dental professionals to give strategies for good dental and oral hygiene, and other allied health disciplines are involved in terms of managing sialorrhea or xerostomia at times of self-care, OT and nursing especially, and physios for postural support. So this slide is an overview of the whole saliva assessment picture. The first step, as usual, that we do for everyone is a background history, including the past medical history and conditions that may be impacting on saliva. The social history, including ability to complete ADLs such as mouth care, and the patient's current condition, so if they're medically unwell or dehydrated. We then gain information about the saliva history, including the changes over time, and in the context of MND, this can help us track decline and may help predict prognosis. And we also need to look at previous medication and treatment options that have already been trialled. We then look at the patient's current symptoms and complaints in regards to saliva, which may be things like thick secretions at the back of the throat or drooling. And at St. Joseph's, we use a lot of tools that helps us narrow down this questioning to get the exact information that we need, which I'll show you in a second. We can, of course, use our swallow assessment, which may be with or without oral trials. And we do an OMA, including a close look at oral health and xerostomia. Then we observe the saliva as clinicians, looking at serous saliva or drooling, or mucoid secretions in the thicker saliva. And we need to consider these in terms of a clinical impact. So how is this impairment actually affecting their everyday life? And finally, I'll also mention FEES. That can be used, that stands for fibre optic endoscopic evaluation of swallowing. So it's putting a nasendoscopy camera down the nose to have a look at the throat, and that can help visualize the secretions, test sensation, and test the swallowing as well. It's generally not used all that frequently in MND due to the fast progressing nature of the disease, and also a lot of patients have high levels of anxiety and don't really want to go through with a procedure like that, but FEES should definitely be considered as a tool as part of your saliva assessment options. So that's an overview of everything that we do to assess saliva. So now I'll just look at some aspects in more detail. So in particular, the OMA is very important to assess the oromotor function and look at the cranial nerves and any unilateral or bilateral weaknesses. and also to look at dysphagia and cough strength. We need to look at their ability to cough and expectorate those secretions and protect the airway when assessing saliva. At St Joseph's, we use a tool called the OHAT, the Oral Hygiene Assessment Tool, and that gives a numerical look at certain aspects of oral hygiene, and it goes through exactly what to ask and what to look for. So things like having a look at dry mouth, the structure and integrity of the teeth, if there's any food particles, if they have pain. And then we supplement this with extra questioning on their current oral hygiene methods, like are they independent with oral hygiene or do they rely on someone else to do it? And what materials and products are used for this, and when was the last time they went to the dentist. We also look at the presence of any possible infections or thrush, and then we give management advice based on that assessment. We also, at St Joseph's, use the following 4 assessment tools that have been validated for use in MND. The first one, which has been already mentioned, is the ALS Functional Rating Scale, and that includes some questions about saliva and the frequency of drooling. We use the Clinical Saliva Scale for MND, which is 8 questions scored on a 24-point scale, and I really like this one because it's very functional. So it doesn't just measure the frequency of drooling or the impact of excess saliva, but it shows exactly how it's affecting their function, like does it impair their speech or make them embarrassed in social situations. Number 3 is the Salivary Scoring Scale, which was originally used to measure silaria in children with disabilities and then later in Parkinson's, and it was validated for use in MND by Mallet in 2013. And this tool measures severity of drooling, so if your lips are wet, it's a low score, versus if the clothes and hands become wet, it's a higher score. And then that's supplemented with the Oral Secretion Scale, which is number 4, and that is to measure the frequency of drooling. So it all sounds like a lot, but they're actually very quick and just tick-a-box forms that really help measure change over time and get a good picture of the problems that are happening. The problem with these tools is that they don't tend to look at thick secretions. So at St Joseph's, we've supplemented that with our own clinician rating scales, the volume scale and the quality rating scale, and a thickness scale and a scale for dry mouth, to get information on those, the thicker secretions as well. And just before I swap with Claire, Professor McDermott and his team at Sheffield University in the UK are looking to do some tests on a possible amended CSS MND scale that will include thickness of saliva, and St Joseph's are collecting data as part of that study too. So watch this space. And now I'll hand over to Claire for saliva management.
You're going to have to be quick, Claire. I'll be quick. I'll have to turbo because I've made everybody late. Okay, all right, so just to recap, these are our 3 main saliva problems, so how do we treat those? And just emphasising what Sarah said is that we do not treat saliva